I bought the house thinking the worst secret there would be water damage. I was wrong. The previous owner never left. He just hid better. The house was on a street too ordinary to attract attention. Polite neighbors, quiet at night, no strange stories. The real estate agent didn't say much. He said the previous owner was a lonely man with no close relatives who had disappeared years before. The paperwork was clean. That was the part that should have worried me most. In the first few days, everything seemed normal. I slept poorly but blamed the move. I heard creaking noises at night, but old houses do that. The problem is that some sounds didn't seem to come from the house. They sounded like light footsteps, always at the same time, always coming from the same spot on the hallway wall. I ignored it. We always ignore what we don't want to explain. I continued living there, working, sleeping, pretending that the constant feeling of being watched was just anxiety, until the day I needed to move the office bookcase to run an internet cable. The bookcase wasn't attached to the wall. Even so, it shouldn't move like that. When I pushed it, it slid too easily, as if it had been placed there on purpose. Behind it, the wall was different. The paint didn't match. The sound of the tap wasn't hollow like the rest of the house. It was muffled. That's when I understood something simple and terrifying. That house wasn't just built to live in. It was built to hide someone. I didn't find a secret room in my house. The house was waiting for me to find it. I bought that house because it seemed too safe to go wrong. Narrow street, old trees, neighbors who knew each other by name. No crime stories, no urban legends, nothing that showed up on online searches. The realtor was direct. The former owner lived alone, had no close family, and disappeared. That was the word used. Disappeared. Didn't die, didn't sell, left no trace. The city took over the property after years of abandonment. Everything legal, everything cold, everything too clean. In the first few days, the discomfort was minor, almost ridiculous, the kind of feeling you ignore so you don't seem paranoid. The air felt heavier in some rooms. The temperature would suddenly drop in the hallway. At night, I would wake up with the clear impression that someone was standing still, watching from the bedroom door. Whenever I turned on the light, there was nothing there. My brain tries to explain stress, change, tiredness, but my body didn't believe those excuses. The sounds started after the first week. They weren't random knocks. They were footsteps, slow, dragging, always at the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning, always coming from the side hallway, exactly where an old bookcase I hadn't touched yet located. The sound never got closer, never moved away, as if someone was walking in circles there, stuck a few meters from me. I ignored it as long as I could. You always ignore things while you can sleep. But I needed to move that bookcase to run an internet cable. When I pushed it, something was wrong. It moved too easily. It didn't make a sound. It didn't scrape the floor. It glided as if it had been used frequently. Behind it, the wall didn't match the rest of the house. The paint was newer. The plaster seemed too thick. When I tapped with my knuckles, the sound didn't return. It was like hitting flesh covered in concrete. At that moment, a certainty pierced me completely, cold and impossible to ignore. The house wasn't empty when I bought it. It was just very well secured. I spent almost an hour standing there staring at that false wall, trying to decide whether to call someone else or open it myself. The truth is, nobody calls for help when there's still a chance they're wrong. I grabbed a screwdriver, then a small hammer. The first blow didn't make enough noise to echo through the house. The second revealed old wood beneath the plaster. This wasn't a structural wall. It was an improvised closure, poorly made, terrifyingly recent for something that should have been decades old. When I ripped off the first large piece, the smell came out before the image, an old, damp air with something metallic and rotten mixed in. It wasn't the smell of something dead. It was the smell of something alive without sun.
The opening revealed a narrow space, tall enough for someone to stand in, but not wide enough to turn around easily. It wasn't a room, it was a hiding place, and someone thought very carefully how to disappear in there. The light from my cell phone came in first. My body stayed outside, but my head was already inside. The walls were scratched with nickels, repeated marks at different heights, as if someone had spent days, perhaps years, walking in circles, touching the walls to avoid going insane in the dark. The floor was worn in a specific pattern, a trail of footsteps that always went back and forth to the same point. There was an improvised bed in the corner. It wasn't old, it wasn't abandoned. The mattress had recently sunk in. A blanket folded with absurd care for someone living in hiding. Empty water bottles, some full, all organized. Food cans stacked by date. This wasn't desperation. It was routine. It was planned survival. Someone had been living there yesterday, or worse, still was. That's when I felt something I had never felt before. Not fear, shame. The clear sensation of invading the privacy of someone who had nowhere to run. My stomach churned when I realized the hiding place had a small hole, well positioned, that led directly to the hallway of the house. It wasn't for ventilation, it was for observation, for listening, to know exactly where I was at all times. When I heard the soft creaking behind me, I didn't need to look to understand. The bookcase was moving on its own, and someone, outside that space, was trying to close the wall again. My body reacted before my head. I took 2 steps back, tripped on my own foot, and almost dropped the hammer. I didn't scream, I didn't call anyone. Instinct didn't tell me to fight or run. It told me to stay quiet, to become invisible. The creaking of the bookcase stopped as quickly as it began, as if someone had realized they were making too much noise. I stood still, breathing through my mouth, trying not to make any sound that would give away my location. When the bookcase stopped, something became clear in the light of my cell phone. On the inside of the false wall, just above eye level, there were words written with something dark, almost erased by time. It wasn't ink, it was charcoal mixed with dirt. The handwriting was firm, patient, like someone who wrote slowly to avoid mistakes. It wasn't a cry for help, it was a list. Rule 1, never make noise after 10 p.m. Rule 2, never turn on the light in the hallway. Rule 3, if you hear footsteps, stay still. Rule 4, don't trust voices. Each line seemed written on a different day, as if the rules were being learned through pain. The last sentence was isolated, deeper in the wall, almost torn. Final rule, he comes in when you forget he's here. I read that several times trying to understand who he was. The former owner, someone who came later, an intruder, or something that never left that house. The problem wasn't knowing the answer. The problem was realizing that those rules made too much sense. I was already following almost all of them without realizing it. I already walked silently at night. I already avoided the hallway. I already froze when I heard footsteps. In the corner of the hiding place, below the list, there was a calendar scribbled on the wall, dates carefully crossed out. The last mark wasn't old. The dust was still on the floor. The date was 2 days before I moved. That destroyed any hope that the space was abandoned. The former owner hadn't disappeared, he had adapted. And now I was torn between 2 worlds, the world of the house and my own. That's when I realized something even worse. The list didn't end there. There was room for new rules, as if someone was waiting for me to make the next mistake.
I stayed in there for too long, reading and rereading those rules, trying to convince my brain that everything had a simple explanation. Intruder, homeless person, some eccentric who had been hiding there for years. Anything was better than accepting what my instinct screamed. That house had learned to coexist with someone who didn't need to be seen to be present. I left the space slowly, put the bookcase back in its place, and spent the rest of the night sitting on the sofa with the light on, as if that had any real power. Many people ask why I didn't call the police at that moment. The answer is simple and shameful. Fear of seeming crazy. What would I say? Hi, I think there's a man living inside the wall of my house, but I haven't seen him. I've only read rules written in the concrete. I needed something concrete. Something that wasn't a feeling, a smell, or intuition. I needed him to make a visible mistake, and that waiting was the biggest mistake I could have made. The next morning, I found something new in the kitchen. A glass sat on the table, perfectly aligned with the rim, as one would habitually do. I hadn't used glasses that night. The most disturbing thing wasn't the object itself, but the care. There was no hurry, no vandalism. It was a domestic gesture, familiar, as if someone were trying to say, I live here too. My throat tightened when I realized he had access to every room. The hiding place wasn't a prison, it was an observation point. The whole house was his territory. I was just the novelty. I spent the whole day walking carefully, avoiding making noise, opening doors slowly, feeling ashamed to exist in my own space. This wasn't ordinary fear. It was silent submission. At the end of the afternoon, I returned to the hallway. The bookcase was exactly as I had left it, but something had changed. The list of rules had a new line. The handwriting was the same. The pressure on the wall, stronger. Rule 5. Don't call anyone. It wasn't a generic warning. It was an answer. He had heard me thinking about the police. He knew I was considering it. And worse, he knew I still didn't have enough courage. Below the new rule, someone had written a smaller, almost respectful phrase. If you break this, I'll have to leave. And in that instant, I understood that as long as he was hiding, I was still safe. I endured exactly 3 days following the rules, 3 days walking in silence, avoiding the hallway, sleeping poorly with the constant feeling of being judged. The mistake didn't come from rebellion, it came from exhaustion. It came from that false courage that appears when fear becomes routine. The third night, near midnight, I turned the television on a little louder than I should have. Not much, just enough to feign normalcy. The sound echoed throughout the house, and in the next second I knew I had crossed an invisible line. Everything went quiet. Not the usual silence of the early morning, but that heavy, active silence, as if the house were holding its breath along with me. The creaking I heard every night didn't come. No footsteps, no dragging. The absence of sound was worse than any noise. My heart began to beat too fast, not from fright, but from anticipation. Something was happening outside my field of vision. Something was being decided. That's when I heard it. Not footsteps in the hallway, not on the wall. Footsteps upstairs, slow, firm, uncommitted, like someone who no longer needs to hide. Each step made the floorboards creak in exactly the same spots, as if he knew that house better than I ever could. The sound wasn't coming towards me. It wandered, it explored, it claimed. I sat on the living room floor, leaning against the sofa, trying to be small, trying to be irrelevant. The television remained on, but I couldn't see anything. The sound muffled my own thoughts, and perhaps that's what he wanted. To avoid hearing my fear, to avoid hearing my breathing. At some point, the footsteps stopped directly above me. The ceiling creaked, dust fell, and something heavy settled, as if he had lain down to listen. Then came another sound, lighter, irregular, a short, almost childish drag. It wasn't the same rhythm, it wasn't the same weight. 2 presences, 2 different patterns. My stomach churned when I realized that the rules spoke of him, but never said that he was alone. The house didn't hide a man, it concealed an agreement.
an old coexistence between things that had learned not to be seen. That night, someone left something on my bedroom door. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't a rule, it was an object of mine that I was absolutely certain I had kept. And if you think this ends with a call to the police, it's because you still haven't understood who really runs that house. The object was there, leaning against my bedroom door, as if carefully placed there to make no sound. It was my watch, the same one I always left in the kitchen drawer before bed because the ticking irritated me at night. I knew exactly where I had left it. The drawer was closed when I went to sleep. There was no doubt. He had opened it. He had touched it. He had chosen that spot on purpose. I held the watch in my hand for long seconds, feeling the cold metal, trying not to imagine the fingers that had been there before me. The strap was adjusted to a different hole, a detail too small to be an accident. This wasn't a direct threat. It was something worse. It was forced intimacy, a silent reminder that my routine was already being observed, studied, perhaps copied. When I turned the watch over, I saw something that had never been there before. A scratch made with a pointed object right on the back, forming a crude, almost childish symbol. A circle cut by a crooked line. I had seen it before, not in a book nor on the internet. On the wall of the hideout, marked several times, always near the fingernail scratches. That wasn't decoration. It was counting. It was a record of time. And that's when everything fell into place. The former owner hadn't disappeared all at once. He had diminished. First, he stopped leaving the house. Then he stopped being seen. Then he stopped occupying space. The house had taught him how to do that, how to hide without dying, how to exist without being noticed. And the clock didn't mark normal hours. It marked how long someone could endure before becoming part of the house. That morning, I returned to the hiding place for the first time since the discovery. There was a new symbol on the wall, recent. The dust was still falling. It wasn't next to the old ones. It was separate, closer to the exit, closer to the hallway, closer to me. I didn't need an explanation. That wasn't a reminder of the former owner. It was the beginning of my record. The rules didn't exist to protect me. They existed to prepare me. Because nobody enters that house to expel someone. They enter to replace them.
The next morning, I didn't plan anything sophisticated. I didn't think about evidence, police, or witnesses. I just thought about leaving. Putting some clothes in a backpack, grabbing documents, and getting out of there before the house realized I'd understood too much. The thought was simple and desperate. If I leave now, maybe there's still a now. I avoided the hallway, went straight through the living room, and walked to the front door, breathless, like someone fleeing a place that could wake up at any moment. The key turned normally, but the door wouldn't open. It wasn't locked, it wasn't jammed. It simply wouldn't move more than a few centimeters, as if something heavy were leaning against it on the other side. Not leaning against it, leaning against it, intentionally. I applied force, feeling my shoulder burn, until I heard a low sound, a slow dragging that faded away. The door then suddenly opened as if it had been released by someone who decided to allow it. Outside, the street seemed wrong, not different, wrong. Too quiet for an ordinary morning. The houses were there, the cars parked, but there was no movement at all. No neighbors, no distant sounds. The air felt the same as inside the house, heavy, still. I took a few steps, but I had the distinct feeling of being watched through windows that were empty. The house behind me creaked as if it were offended. It was only when I reached the end of the street that I realized the impossible. I was back in front of the same house, same door, same crooked tree in the garden, same cracked step. I hadn't turned any corner. I hadn't gotten lost. I simply hadn't left its territory. My body froze when I understood. The house didn't just occupy a lot. It occupied the path, time, decision.
There, sitting on the curb, I understood why no one ever found a former owner. He didn't disappear outside, he disappeared inside. Inside the routine, the limited space, the rules that gradually reduce someone until there's nothing left worth searching for. People don't disappear from that house. They stay, invisible, functional, necessary. When I went back inside, the bookcase was already open. There was no threat, there was no hurry, just a waiting space. And the most terrifying certainty of all, the house wouldn't stop me from leaving if I agreed to stay. I stood there in the open space for too long to be courage and too short to be giving up. There was no one inside, no figure waiting, no audible breathing, only the organized emptiness, the narrow bed, the marks on the wall, the incomplete calendar. The house didn't push me, it didn't threaten, it only offered, like someone who already knows the answer before the question is asked. At the back of the hiding place where I hadn't looked properly before, I found something different, a name scratched repeatedly on the wall until it was almost a blur. It wasn't a signature, it was insistence. He tried to remember who it was while he could still write. Next to it, smaller, fainter marks that ended abruptly. That's when I understood. The former owner didn't die. He forgot. When the name disappears, the person goes with it. I didn't go into that space that night. I went back to my room. I slept badly. I woke up worse. But something had changed. The rules no longer scared me. They made sense. The house didn't want violence, blood, or screams. It wanted continuity. It wanted someone who would learn the rhythm, who would respect the limits, who would accept slowing down. A house doesn't feed on people, it feeds on permanence. The following days passed strangely peacefully. The footsteps ceased, the noises too. I started leaving food out without realizing it, lowering the volume before 10, avoiding the hallway without thinking. When I noticed, I was already following rules I didn't remember reading. The hiding place remained open, not as a threat, as a permanent invitation. If you're listening to this now, pay attention to something simple. Houses don't choose just anyone. They choose who stays, who tolerates, who adapts, who prefers silence to confrontation, who thinks they can endure a little longer. That's how it begins. Nobody disappears suddenly. People become too small to be seen. Today, I write this sitting in the hallway near the bookcase. The space is clean, prepared. A new name is being slowly marked on the wall. It's not complete yet. There's still time. If anyone finds this recording, just remember one thing. If a house seems too big on the inside, maybe it's because it's still waiting for someone.